And I'm Alex. I'm from Big Step. Big Step is a company specialized in big data and high performance applications. We are basically a cloud provider, and we have two components. One is an infrastructure as a service component, where we are similar to AWS and Azure, but we do everything with bare metal. So it's a very, very flexible bare metal infrastructure, and obviously that is very, very good for big data applications. And the other component of our business is the big data platform, where we aggregate, we orchestrate big data technologies, starting with Hadoop infrastructures, but also a host of other applications around dashboards, around data science platforms like Zeppelin, Jupyter, and all the others. So we're specialists in Spark, and we can get more into the details later if you want.
Okay, and I want to jump right into the subject, because you are doing some business also in Romania, but also in Europe, and I was curious to know what are some of the big data management solutions used by companies across Europe and here locally.
I mean, first of all, I don't like the word big data so much, I must admit, because in the end it's a buzzword about something companies have doing for a lot of time.
Many years.
It's basically about data. It's a data management, information management. And we work with clients mostly in the banking industry, but not only. And of course, if you look at what they're doing, is on the one hand, of course, there's the classic use cases in banks, like credit risk management. Like we have some client who's very good in doing loans in interesting markets, but you need to be very good in assessing the risk of those loans if you want to make money with it. So that's one thing. But of course also areas like marketing, sales effectiveness. These are the classic applications that it's already boring, right? People have been doing this for ages, but it's still a challenge. We see in other industries upcoming things like predictive maintenance in manufacturing is actually coming up a lot, because people are starting to collect data from their sensors, their machines, or in telco industry, network analysis, what's wrong with my infrastructure, this kind of stuff. So there's, I think, plenty, and these were just few examples, there's plenty of opportunities that are even not foreseeable now. So people, and that's exactly, I guess, what we will be talking about, people need to start collecting data not only for a single purpose, but collect it and then find out what else they can do with that data.
So to continue on your train of thought, you're absolutely right. So we need to start collecting data, and a lot of businesses are now thinking, especially because GDPR is looming, they're now thinking about the data that they currently have and the data that they want to capture. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, nowadays is how do you make sure that you explain to the customers what you use that data for. And that is a big challenge for big data, because big data typically handles data that has been collected prior and just repurpose it for some another purpose. So how can you tell your customer what are you going to use the data for if you don't know, right, as a business? So what certain companies are looking at doing is building data laboratories for the sole purpose of identifying what sort of data they have and identifying what sort of business objectives they might have out of that data, so that they can write on their website to be compliant the uses, so that the customers understand what the vendor will do with the data that it entrusts the vendor with.
May I just add to that a bit? It's a bit of pity, because usually a panel should have controversial points of views, right?
Everybody agrees here.
We're too much on the same
ideas
side
are
there,
too good.
because it would be great if we would someone here advocating like a bit the anarchy in data analytics.
The devil advocate.
Because it's a bit a trend that we of course see now. What I was actually also talking about in the speech yesterday was there were 8 times where we built those highly governed, expensive data warehouses which took forever, created no business value, but they were at least organized. Now there's a bit the counter trend of building these data lakes where you just dump stuff into and then eventually use it for something. You mentioned GDPR, thank you for that keyword, because exactly there's even some regulations that now enforce you to make more sense of and find out what data you actually have. And it's really for me that the challenge now for the upcoming times is to acknowledge, okay, we need to be more flexible on the infrastructure and technical level, but still we need the metadata, the business meaning of the data, the knowledge where what data is stored, the lineage, the data quality, that kind of stuff we still need to do. We need to do it differently because we don't have this pre-built, wonderful, monolithic thing, but we need to find a way in these new infrastructures to also address those topics. So I agree fully.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned here GDPR. This is the new regulation for data management across EU. It should be enforced next year. From your discussions with companies, what are they afraid or what are they telling you?
Well, being German, maybe I'm not so afraid because we had similar legislations there already for a while. But yes, we do actually see we're quite active in Romania, but also Czech Republic. So these kind of countries which had looser regulations before, and I think companies are still in the stage of waking up. But we see this happening, that they suddenly start. We are partnering with one of the large consulting companies and legal companies, etc., to see, because they are the first ones who are going to be addressed by, okay, I don't want to be in trouble, well, there's some time left, so what do I need to do? So they start from the legal perspective, but in the end, it's not about legal, it's about really understanding your data and cataloging your data and classifying your data, knowing what person-related data you have, what you do with it. Do you have the justification, either legally or based on consent, to use that data and to document this properly?
So this actually has become even more important than it used to be, data lineage and data provenance, keeping track of that, because of the new, the GDPR introduces also the right to be forgotten, which means we need to be able to use this catalog that we've built, or we should have built for the data that we put into the data lake, to go back at the source and delete the data that the customer wants to be removed, or at least download it when the customer exercises its right to access. So if a customer comes to a website and says, I want to have a copy of all the data that you have on me, for me, if I have 50 different databases, how do I find everything, right? Because there's nothing that's correlated. So big data, the big data lake, and the meta store that's associated with it will be key to identifying and actually implementing this in practice.
Okay, and now that we're also talking about new regulation, what are some of the new tools that companies can use to manage their massive amounts of data?
I mean, again, if you look at the participants here at the conference, there is the Clicks and Tableaus and these kind of guys out there. And these, of course, useful tools because basically what they do is they enable the user to do more with the data and don't require the very fancy, expensive, complex IT projects to do certain things. But as I said in the beginning, or we both actually said earlier, there is also a danger connected to this, because if everybody does its own thing, you build your silos again and you don't have the overview what happens with the data. So I think, this is one side of the tools. Another side of the tools is help to build this infrastructure properly, orchestrate this infrastructure properly. I guess you guys are doing exactly this, but there's of course other vendors like being German, Datamir is one vendor in this field to also.
It's a partner of ours.
Give some other names. So this is another area, and now the third area, of course, I need also to speak what we're doing. So the data governance field, data definitions, glossary, data lineage, metadata, but also data quality is another area I think which is coming up. For example, Gartner has this year, second time, a market guide on information stewardship applications. This is a pretty new field actually, but it's really upcoming, I think, and it will be more and more important with these kind of things coming up.
So I want to summarize for people that are less technical in the audience. So we're talking about data, right? The problem is, because there's so much data in big data, you need data that describes data. It's a little bit of an inception, but it's important to keep this metadata, the data about data, accurate, right, as we move forward. So we don't have a data swamp on our hands. We have something that's structured and regulated, and we don't just gather everything. In fact, with the GDPR, we won't be allowed to do that. And but I want to shift the discussion a little bit towards towards the human dimension of this business. So it's not, I think, especially due to the GDPR, it's no longer just about the tools that we all use. It's also about the processes and the people that are involved in this, in designing big data infrastructures and designing big data analytics and big data, real-time infrastructures and everything. So the big data architects and the data scientists out there, they need to realize that they have the same responsibility when operating data as somebody that operates a bulldozer, right? A heavy machinery, because with data there's a lot of power. You can influence people in great ways, and so there's a lot of kids out there which are data scientists that don't know that the data that they handle have so much power. So my question to you would be, how do you feel we should go about doing these, let's say, moving towards professionalism in a business which has just opened up its eyes to the world? Although we have been doing it for the last 10 years, I think only now the European Commission suddenly realized that they need to regulate the field.
I think my view on this is if you do this purely with regulation, it's gonna happen because you have to, but nobody will really do it properly because they just do it to check the box.
Yes.
What you need to manage is to show them the added value. And we actually had the banking industry, which we were strong in, were a bit earlier in this whole topic because they had other regulations like BCBS 239, Basel, etc., which forced them to do similar things. And what we saw there is actually in the beginning they were doing this because they had to. But when you manage to get into their, we actually say like get the metadata idea into their kind of DNA. So basically the guys working with the data are using this, we call it a business model or business metadata glossary, however you want to call it. But if they start using it in their everyday work, so let's say they want to analyze some data. First thing they do, they check this glossary if this data exists already in some platform that they have. And if it's missing, when they add it, they do this through this kind of integrated tool that allows them, so it becomes part of the process, part of the data development usage process. And if you manage to achieve that, it's a development the organization has to go through. It will not happen overnight. But if you step by step manage to also a bit change the way people work with the data, and they start using this metadata to stick to the term in their everyday work, they will see the benefit. And then it will become a no-brainer. It will just work on its own. If you just do it with force, it's not going to be successful in the end.
Okay, and, I like that you brought up the subject of responsibility when it comes to data management. And do you think that the public sector is doing enough to actually take advantage, so to speak, of the massive amounts of data it gets about its citizens? I mean, they can develop some projects, some services in a better way. What's your perspective across Europe? What are the countries that are doing it better? And
I must say I don't know so well the Romanian situation.
It's bad.
What I can say is in companies in countries like Germany or Austria, where we are pretty strong in, there is actually quite big trend the last years. Also actually pushed a lot by the European Union. If you look at the research funding they have in open data and enabling the government to open their data assets that they have to the public. And I actually see the large organizations always had this kind of data. They found it, they either bought it or had some other way to do it. But I see especially an opportunity in the small medium enterprises that through this open data, which is like available to the public, they can extend their analytic capabilities. So like to give an example, they can use demographic data about regions to think marketing-wise which regions to target. And these kind of examples, which were in the past open only to large organizations who could afford it, there's a big opportunity by opening this data also for smaller organizations. How do you see it in Romania?
So Romania is trying to make steps towards this direction. So there is the government body that actually regulates this in our industry, has started to generate documentation about GDPR and how it applies to the Romanian public. But I think that since we are part of the European Union, a lot of the documentation applies. The documentation that has been created by anybody, including ICO, by the Information Commissioner Officer from from Britain, that applies to the Romanian legislation as well. So you can look at that. You can look at the German regulation, even though each country has variations on the theme, because the GDPR is a pan-European legislation. You can look at any of these organizations for guidance if you want. So I think, for specifically GDPR guidance, I think the building blocks are there. We just, as organizations, we just need to look them up, right? To try to get professional advice and to do something. But to talk about, you said something about controversial discussions. So regarding disclosure of public data sets, so that definitely helps businesses evolve faster, right? Because you can do correlations with your existing internal data sets. But at the same time, the same GDPR prevents you from doing profiling for direct marketing purposes unless you get consent from customers. So because profiling, which is a common technique in big data to try to identify characteristics of a person, right, and targeting them better, and that's really powerful. And Facebook has ads that are 300 times more efficient if they are targeted to somebody than regular ads. And obviously, it's supposed to be that. But that comes at a cost. Information that's disclosed by a public regulator about demographics can also lead to effects such as when somebody is in the shadow of a data set, like what's called a signal problem, when certain groups are underrepresented. So to give you an example of what I mean, there is an application in Boston in the US for measuring street bumps. So there's an application that you install in your iPhone, and it uses the accelerometer and the GPS information to map regions with potholes. But what the regulators have found, and that's used by the sitting council, what they found is that there are areas within Boston where low-income people live and where elderly people live, where there are no potholes. And the problem is not that there are not potholes, they're actually worse potholes. The problem is they don't have smartphones. So not having data about a particular area can actually lead to discrimination and to reactions from the public sector as well as private sector to do pretty problematic situations. So there are a lot more examples like this when certain categories of the public live in what's called the shadow of big data.
I agree, but that's exactly, I think, then the task of the government in this area of open data, to make sure the data sets that are given to the public are, at least representative in certain ways. But I agree, this danger exists.
Yes, but so the government needs to understand that they need to protect the public through the disclosure, but at the same time teach businesses how to use these data sets properly, so that they don't, inadvertently use artificial intelligence to basically amplify the bias that's already in the society.
Okay, and to move this discussion forward a little bit, we had earlier a speaker who told us some more about blockchain and the way it will revolutionize the business world. Everything will become easier. We will have control of our data. What's your take on this? Do you think this will have an impact on the industry, on the big data industry in the coming years? Or
I think personally a bit that this hype is a bit overrated. Just
he didn't say that.
My personal opinion, because it doesn't have to have impact on everything in the world, and not big data either necessarily. But I do think that blockchain will make some difference, and especially in the payment industry. I heard a very interesting speech by a former manager in the European Central Bank, who actually talked about how he sees the payment industry going, and he also said, like, it's just a matter of time until there will be some visible impact through this. So yes, I think something will happen. Will it change the world completely? I don't think so. And will it change the way we deal with big data? Honestly, I don't think so. But maybe you have another view.
No, I agree with you. It's as with any technology, they go through this hype curve, right? So there are first just a few early adopters, then a lot more adopters, then it grows, hockey stick exponentially. Everybody starts talking about it, nobody's doing it, and then it sort of falls down because they realize, the hype was generated by something that was unrealized. The promises were unrealized. But then at one point, it stabilizes and it becomes a useful technology. So this has happened with the cloud, and this has happened with the big data. That's why big data is going away, because it's become normal data. I think at one point, as you said, probably blockchain technology. I'm not sure about cryptocurrency, but blockchain technology, I think, will become a useful technology. And for sure, there are reasonable and realistic applications of the technology. And I think GDPR is actually one aspect where you could use blockchain technology for doing, for making sure that you can demonstrate that the user has given consent at one point. Because blockchain, for those of you who don't know, basically each block is generated based on a hash of the previous block. So the more the more data you add to this chain, the harder it is for somebody to tamper with the initial blocks. So this happens. What you can use this for is a sort of a official ledger of transactions. So if somebody comes to my site and checks the box and say, I agree to this data to be processed, and and as time goes by, I can demonstrate to the authorities that this guy has given consent, because I cannot alter the data in the distributed ledger. So this is one use of blockchain technology, which I think could be okay, but it is not going to change the world as we know it.
I agree.
And looking a bit at next year, in terms of investments that companies plan to make in this area of data management, what are some of the trends you are seeing, or some of the demands coming from large enterprise clients maybe? Or
actually, as you said, I also see that this big data thing becomes, that's why I don't like the word, becomes kind of a standard. Actually, the technologies that were labeled big data, like Hadoop, like Spark, you named some of them, they become normal technologies nowadays. And that's actually what we're seeing also in some of our clients, that there were some early adopters, which some of them were the clever ones. They were the Googles, etc., who really needed this from the beginning. But there were also some who some manager read somewhere, oh, Hadoop is cool, we need it, so they bought it, and nobody knew what really to do with it. There's many cases like that where lots of money was wasted for nothing. But I think this phase is kind of over. We now see in our clients that they are back to talking about the problem before they come with the solution. This is actually something.
Yes,
there was some time where people were, I have the solution, but okay, what's your problem? I don't know yet, but so
I'll figure it out.
We are now back into normal, where people are seeing use cases. For example, we have a client again in the finance industry who is actually in China very active, and they need to score huge amounts of clients because China is a huge country. They have a large number of clients, and they are actually very good in this credit scoring. They want to very frequently rescore their clients, and they cannot do it sequentially. They need to parallelize it. So Hadoop and the kind of Hadoop implementation of their scoring algorithm is the logical way to do it, and they're most likely going to do this now. So we see investments in this field, but it becomes not a hype anymore. It becomes a justified investment by a business use case, and I think the activities you are doing with, getting some more structure into this and out of the chaos hype back into plan it properly, orchestrate it properly, implement it into the processes. I think we're going to see a lot of stuff in this area. Maybe also the stuff we're doing with data governance, understanding the data, defining the data. This was not, I must say, it's still kind of hard topic to sell nowadays because you need 30 minutes to explain it. But I think the next years, next year, maybe the year after, we will see a lot of change in this direction because people will understand the need for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. There is a lot of demand nowadays for exactly, for resolving particular particular problems, business problems that people have, right? So improving operations is one direction in which we see a lot of demand, but there's also a lot of demand coming from the marketing side of things, so where they are the holder of the keys to a lot of money because they want to understand their user better. And we've seen a lot of traction in retail, for instance, to give you a few examples, where they want to understand, because they operate with very, very low margins without becoming purely data driven and using big data to squeeze that 0.5% or 1% on top of their margins. It's very, very hard to differentiate, and so that they work both in the way they target their customers and they choose their products and they calculate their prices, but also in the way they do fulfillment and make sure that they optimize the stocks and do stock predictions. So there's a lot of applications across the industry, across all industries. What I think we need more is just more informed people looking at real use cases that have been implemented and asking partners and vendors such as yourself and ours to actually help in implementing those things.
Just to add to that, regarding investments, because we talked about GDPR so much, so let's at least cover this one as well, because I sense that at the moment most companies are still kind of confused and just trying to understand what the heck they need to do. We actually expect that second quarter next year is when the actual projects will happen, when people have realized, I need to catalog the data, I need to do an inventory, I do need to do these kind of things. So this is, midterm for the, let's say, first half of next year, what we actually expect to happen. So also this topic is not over, even though you read it everywhere. It's a bit hype at the moment, but I think the actual, realistic way of doing something about it will also happen next year.
Yeah, because some of the other panelists were saying that it's not okay that the legal department is handling GDPR. It should be more on the IT side, so it's not about the lawyers.
Yes, you're absolutely right. But you do need the lawyers.
You need them.
Because somebody needs to interpret that properly and be the keeper of the actual words. But they need to work closely with everybody that's in IT as well as overall across the organization. It is, I feel, is that we see this sort of, I call it the student effect. Right? We had 2 years to prepare, but we were doing our homework, it just that night before the exam.
It's true. And just one remark to GDPR, maybe last one for now. Yeah. Actually, you may think that client data is the biggest, most important aspect there. What we actually see in discussions with partners and customers is that actually HR and employee data is much bigger mess in most organizations than customer data. So it's something not to be forgotten. This is also about persons and about individuals, and it also is affected by GDPR. So this is a big topic as well.
There's also another data category that people don't realize that it's also sort of personal, is observed data. So data that we see through logs on our website. So that's still personal data, because if leaked, depending on the type of website that you have, if it can reveal the patterns, the buying patterns of a certain person, it can reveal other things about him, like sexual orientation or background, income levels and stuff like that, which are personal information about people. So derived data and informed data that you generate through statistical analysis are also very important pieces of information that you need to protect as well.
Okay, and I'd like to thank you for the great discussion. We're out of time, and we're gonna take a short break and gonna return with the final panel that we have for today. It's about hardware security.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.